Hi, I wanted to show you what's new in the hair tool. So in version 3.0, I removed support for old particle hair and for old curves. Only new hair curves are supported now. So maybe I will show you when using hair drawing. And I will just select this mesh in here, hold D and left click to drag. It will draw some strands. It is way too wide, so I will reduce width like so, and maybe we select this mesh and switch this to wireframe so it will be easier to see what is going on. And visually it may not look like, but if I go to outliner, you see this is the active object and the icon says this is the new hair curve type. By default, Blender does not have any modeling tools for new hair curves, maybe except moving or deleting points. So in Hair Tool, I added options under W key. In here, you can subdivide segments like that. You can maybe extrude some points. So if I select those and press E to extrude, or maybe from the other side, I can press W, extrude like that. So these are extruded from an end, and then you have option to duplicate strands. So if I select those in here, I can duplicate them like so, and there is option to separate selection, and nothing changed visually, but if I go to object mode, you see we have two objects. I can join them back together using Ctrl+Shift+H in object mode, and then join them back together. And finally, it has some options for adjusting tilt and radius. So by default in Blender you have Alt S, and in Hair Tool added this hotkey also for new hair curves. And if you want, you can press also W, adjust radius using in here, or set radius to uniform value like so. And there is similar tool for adjusting tilt using Ctrl T. It would work for old curves, and now it works also for new curves using Hair Tool Ctrl T. And set tilt will just set this to any manually entered value. Now I wanted to show you how to work with the profiles in Hair Tool. So basically it will be easier to see maybe in the solid view, and I will enable wireframe. Okay, so you edit profile using Ctrl+Shift+H, edit profile. In here you can switch maybe profile type. So default global scale value 1 is good for default cube, but this time I will use value 1/10 because this head is around 10 times smaller than the default cube. So you can adjust the properties in here, and those are not affecting the curves themselves. So if I go to edit mode, you see the curves are not affected. It is only affecting the profile look. So let's go back to the edit profile and maybe flat profile again. I will reduce width, and in here you can maybe add some additional subdivision in the direction perpendicular to the strand direction. With that we can maybe make the strands rounder. Then you can use this uplift, and this uplift only works if the roundness is not 0. If I flatten the strands, uplift does not change anything. This width from UV is actually helpful because it will assign narrow strand width to narrower UV boxes. I will maybe enable this, but that there is no difference because we are using just one UV box. In here you can change the material. So basically do not change the material from the material tab. If you try to do this in here and maybe change the color, you see nothing change in the viewport. But if I copy this material name and edit profile and change this material in the profile tab, you see now it is working correctly. So I will undo this, and the last section is about the UV. So basically it is saying that we are using UV data 002. To edit UVs, it works the same way as in the old Hair Tool. So you just go to the UV image editor and click Hair Tool UV, just left click and drag to add new UV boxes, and you see they were automatically added to the right. Enter to accept, and this automatic assignment is due to using of this auto UV regions distribute. So if I disable this auto UV region distribute, the same option is visible in here. It is now disabled. Now if I add new UV boxes, you see nothing changing is changing on the right because auto UV was disabled. This is helpful because if you want to manually edit some UVs, so I switch to the hair modeling tool. Using Ctrl-Shift-H, I can now use set UV regions and manually assign some UV boxes like that, just clicking on them. And you also can see that the auto UV width now works correctly. Narrower UVs are receiving narrower width of the profile. And then let's assign different UV regions on the right, maybe this one. So now remember, if you enable auto UV, it will mess up your manual work. So that's why it is important to know if you want to have auto UV regions assigned or not. And if you enable auto UVs, you have still option to pick if you want to use all regions or just pick some of them. So maybe I want to automatically assign UV regions, but only second, third, and fourth. So this way you are not forced to use all of them. But if you want, you can just use all UV regions, and then you will use all the UV boxes from here. And the last section, I wanted to show you how to work with multiple objects that use the same profile. So I will duplicate those, and if I go to the Ctrl-Shift-H, you see this number in here. It is showing that 3 objects are using the same profile. If I change the width, it got adjusted in the 3 objects. If you want, you can click this number 3, and now only one object is using this profile, and in here we see 2 objects are using those profiles. So if I maybe change this to curls and reduce the size of the curls, you see only this one object got adjusted. If I go in here and adjust profile, maybe switch this to circle or maybe braids, adjust the global size, so we have the braids on those two because they share the same profile. And there is option to copy and paste the profile if you want quickly. So now those two objects are sharing the same curly profile, so I can adjust the frequency in here, change the amplitude, or switch this back to the flat profile in here. And the last info, usually you will want to work with same profile, with same UV and material. But if you really want, the bottom two properties are not really shared. So what I mean by that, if I remove the material, you see, even though those two objects share the profile, the material is kinda unique. If I undo this, the same thing is true for the UV data. So if I remove the UV data, for example, you see UVs got removed from the left, not from the right. Even though if I adjust width, it still got adjusted on both of those. We do not see the left object, but because it does not has UV data. But if I define new UV regions, you see this automatically got adjusted, and we have two objects with same profile but different UVs. So I think that covers the working with profiles in the hair tool. Hope you like those new features. So I also wanted to mention that the hair modeling tools available in here, all the hotkeys are now working on the new curve type, and you can use this for maybe extrude the strands, press key to slice them, and all the hotkeys are available in here. So old curves will no longer will be supported, but other than that, you can use all of those just like in the past. So now I will show you the bottom pie menu. There is option to adjust radius, tilt, some smoothing, adjusting length, and then lastly for joining, separating the curves. Those tools work in both object mode using hair modeling or in edit mode. In this video I will show you in object mode using hair modeling. So I will select some strands and then using Ctrl Shift H I can multiply this radius. I can set radius to some value, so I can set this to 2 and it will set this to uniform value across the strand length, and then there is option to taper using the curve like so. So now I can widen them using radius multiply, and we have the starting the similar look for the to the start. There is option to add tilt like so. You can set tilt to given value, so I can set this maybe to 0, and this is how it looks with 0 tilt. And there is option to align tilt to object. So in past you would have to use this target object, but now even if I remove this target and then I use align tilt, it will still work. It is because currently the align tilt is looking for curve properties and surface data object, and in this case this grid punk is this object. So aligning tilt new to align tilt to this surface. If you want, you can override this object using different target in here, and this will be a more important property than the surface. And lastly, there is option to randomize tilt. So in here you can give random tilt along the length of the strands, and there is option to randomly flip direction. So some strands will flip clockwise, some will turn anti-clockwise. And let's reset tilt to the align using align tilt. In the next section we have some option to smooth radius, to smooth the tilt, but currently tilt is uniform, so smoothing does not change much. There is option to smooth position. You can adjust the strength in here. There is option to adjust length. So using this slider you can make them longer or shorter, and it takes into account the curvature of the strands. So it is not just extending them straight, but it is kind of bending them like so. Okay, and then finally we have the curve resample. It will be easier to see in edit mode. So I will select some strands in here, and then using curve resample we can increase or decrease the points count. We can force the points distribution to be uniform along the length of the strand. Enabling uniform point count will make it so that even short or long strands will have the same amount of points, and offset to tip will make move points more toward the tip. Offset to root will move points more toward the root. Okay, and the last option in the utils is simplify. So simplify is slightly different because it will reduce the points depends on the curvature of the strand. So the straight segment was reduced to just two points, but in places where the strand is bending we have more points. This could be used for one last step before exporting this to maybe game engine to simplify the poly count and reduce the poly count. And the last section is about separation of the strands. So visually nothing changed, but if I go to object mode, you see we have now those two objects. I can use Ctrl Shift H and join them back together. And lastly, there is option to slice curves using mesh. So if I add maybe some plane, move this into this position, and if I select both curve and this mesh, I can use now slice using mesh, and the curve was cut, I can repeat this maybe in here and slice this using mesh again, like so. You can obviously use more complicated meshes to get more interesting results. So I think that covers all the tools in here. And just remember, you can use them in edit mode. So for example, if I want, I can use resample, then bump up the resolution, again use equal point counts, then I can use the adjust length and then lengthen them like so. So yeah, that covers I think all of the options in the bottom, and they are also accessible from the right side. So in here we have this hair operations, and all those panels like subpanel for radius is here, for tilt is here, utils and others are also available from the right side panel. So now let's jump to the Ctrl-Shift-H and generate section. The content depends on the selection. I have the curve selected, so I have option to add hair system. So let's maybe add strand generation. We do not see any strands generated. I think it is because we have not enough density. So I will bump up this way more. So this is the first option. I will remove the system and leave the profile on. And then there is the hair dragging. So with that enabled, I can add new strands to existing strands, or I can extend selected strands like so. And if I remove this object and select mesh object in here, I have different options available. So I still can add hair system, and then there is the new option of curves from grid surface. So in the past, it would use Python to generate the strands, but now it will use geometry nodes. So it is complaining about no edge being marked as sharp. So I will select this edge and use Ctrl E, mark sharp, and then let's run this curves from grid surface again. And we have this pop-up. It is slightly different from what it was in past. And basically what this button does is adding preset of hair system with some of the deformers visible in here. The same panel is available from the hair system tab. We have this subsystem automatically created, and with those deformers. So there is align tilt, there is UV region set to generate UVs, and the first one, deformer, is the new strands from grid. Basically, it works kind of similar to what it was using the Python. So you have control over strands count, placement, mask. You can use maybe vertex group to control the density or the placement of the strands. The seed will change the placement distribution. Then there is the uniform factor. When this is 100%, the spacing will be even between strands. And when I change the uniform to 0, it will add more strands in the back because it is in here the grid surface is more dense. So compared to the front, when we have bigger spacing between the edges. Okay, so there is also option to randomize spacing. If you randomize spacing, you have seed option, and then there is guide counts. So basically, guide counts. There are generated virtual guides for each kind of edge like this, and we can say if child strands should use one guide or two guides or more. So with that, you have non-destructive workflow. You can add more deformers, so we can taper this. We can add maybe scale and bump up the size. We can add noise deformer, and everything is non-destructive. So the last section in the Ctrl-Shift-H, the Strand Generation panel, is this hair with track mesh, this option. I will show you on scalp mesh. So in the hair library, I will go to the subcomponents and I will pick the scalp and append this to the scene. We have this scalp mesh added to the scene. In the modifiers, I will pick target as head, and I will apply now this shrink wrap to the scalp. And now let's use the Control Shift H track to hair with track to mesh. And you can see we have this offsetted copy of scalp created. I can use F9 to maybe tweak this offset and increase this slightly. And we do not see any strands generated because the head is quite small. So I have to go to the scalp. And in the hair system properties, you see this subsystem is added with deformers. I will bump up density like so. And now if I go back to the duplicated copy, the idea is that if you move this copy, it will be used as a target for track 2 deformer. Basically, this is working in similar way as the curves from grid surface. It is basically adding hair system with few deformers added. So it is added this track to mesh deformer. Without it, we do not have, we just have straight hair strands. You could, in theory, add this manually by going to plus, track to, and track to mesh. Then we have this tilt align deformer. Without it, it would not align to the surface. And then we have this UV regions to assign UV regions to hair strands. And the idea is that you can go maybe to sculpt mode and use maybe a nudge brush and move those strands in sculpt mode to edit the hairstyle. Or you could go with grab brush and grab some parts, and this way, by using scalp brush, you could tweak the hairstyle quite quickly. So just remember to comb the guide mesh and not the original one. With this technique, you could easily create maybe hairstyle with split. So all you have to do, go to the duplicated guide mesh, rip one edge like so. Maybe it will be easier to see in a solid view. And now if I enable soft selection with connected only, you can grab one part like this, then select one other part in here like this, and you basically just created hairstyle with split by splitting the guide mesh. And after a bit of tweaking, you could get decent results. Maybe I will show you that you could add other deformers. It is the same as in other hair systems. So I could add radius set to taper the strands. I could add maybe noise deformer, reduce the size, etc., etc. And basically, this technique is used in here for the eyebrows. So if I select the eyebrows guide mesh, and yeah, if I go to maybe edit mode, I can move this guide mesh for the eyebrows, and you see it is affecting how they look. And also the add-on will automatically add shape key to the guide mesh when you create the hair setup. So in the shape keys we have this hair groom. If I set this to 0, it will just blend to the basic shape. So this way you can work in non-destructive way. If you make some tweaks that you don't like, you can just remove this shape key, add new one, and sculpt this mesh to get maybe better results. So this shape key you can see in here is also created, and if I set this to 0, it will just reset the shape to the original. And maybe this does not look the best, but if I go to hair library, in here I have the male with parting. It is basically using the same setup. So maybe I will brighten the texture. So in the shader, I will tweak the default hair tool material, and in here we have this gradient node. So I will bump up the brightness slightly, and I will make quick breakdown of this hairstyle. So we have this guide mesh it is also in two parts. So this is one part, and this is the second. Maybe I will isolate this, and we have this one part and second part, and it is guiding the hair system on the scalp. So this hair system is made from two subcomponents, subsystems. First one do not have the UV region set, so we do not see UVs. I will just add this quickly, and it is not looking great because the idea is it will only be used as particles for child particles as target for clamping. So it has few deformers. First one is the track 2. So without this track we have straight hair strands. Then I added some noise. Then we have the UV regions just to see the UVs. Then some other deformers. And then if I enable the child particles, so you can see the parent is set to clamp and the first system is tagged as clamp. So now the second system is with this clamp deformer is now clamping toward the parent particles in the first system. Okay, so we have the clamps, we have some noise to the child particles added, and some other deformers, and everything, as you can see, is not non-destructive. So the last feature I wanted to show is the improvement in the baking setup. So in past you would click open baking scene and this would load new blend file. Now there is new option import baking scene, and this will import baking here scene into current blend file. If I click OK, you see that in the top we have the new setup, new scene, and the old scene. And the setup is quite similar to the old one. On the left we have the preview of what the result of the bake will be, and on the right we have the new hair cards that will be used for previewing results of the bake. So if I switch to the material view, they are transparent because there is no texture baked yet. But let's quickly select few passes. So I will shift click on opacity, root map, and depth map. Then I will select output path. So in my case, I will just use temporary path, and I click bake. After a few seconds, it should load those textures into preview material on the right, and you see this is how the result of the bake looks like on the actual haircard geometry. So this preview material is using all the textures on the left. In my case, I used only root map, depth map, and opacity. So you can use root map to feed this through color ramp and colorize the strands like so. Then I can mix this with depth map using this factor slider. This will add some depth to the hair strands. It will be easier to see on the white color, so without and with. And now I can quickly check out this texture on the original hair. So you would do this manually by going to the original scene and then switch your workspace to your previous workspace. But I made this one click option, switch to main scene. This will bring back the original scene and switch the workspace automatically. And now to assign this preview material, just remember, if you try to do this here, then we won't see the result. You have to use Ctrl-Shift-H, and then in the profile settings, switch the material in here, and we see the bake result. So I can go maybe to the shading and tweak some parameters and colors in here. So I will add one more slider, maybe make the root darker, change this like so to maybe blue color, and okay, let's say I like the result, but the density is quite high. So just to quickly change this, I would use again the hair tool tab, the baking panel, and switch back this time to baking scene. and I would go to the strands on the left, and I want to tweak the settings on them. So in the hair subsystem for those strands, we have few subsystems. I already know that I want to tweak the third one. So I go to the deformers, and I want to reduce the strand count in the generation. So I will set this to 100, and maybe I will bump up the curls amplitude. So let's bump this up maybe like so, and I will bake this again, and soon it should update on the right. And maybe you have seen that the few strands that use this UV region were updated, and maybe I will quickly show you hair system setup on those strands. So we have the base that is generating those strands. Then there is the second subsystem. It is disabled, but it is better for previewing fur-like hair. And last system is there actually for assigning the UVs. So if I go to the deformers of the last system, we have some noise deformer, and we have some UV distribute, and using this UV distribute I can pick different UV regions. So by default all UV regions are used, but you can preview only one. So I will pick the last one because I updated only this one. Let's go back to the original scene. So in the hair baking I'll switch to the main scene, and the texture is not as dense as it was in second ago. So now I can maybe add another system and more particles. So I will go and click strand generator, and we do not see any strands, so I will bump up density. Now the problem is that the strands are generated all over the place on the surface, but I want to generate them only close to the head surface. So in that case, I want to use different strand generation method. I will remove this subsystem and then click plus, and this time add strand from grid surface. Now if I bump up the strand count, we do not see anything. It is because we do not have any edge marked as sharp. So I go to edit mode, select one loop, edge loop, Control E, mark sharp, and now you see the strands were generated correctly. And this way you can work in non-destructive way. I could maybe disable using of the parents and remove parent strands, and let's add some deformers in here. So I will add tilt align to surface. Maybe I will add some noise, maybe reduce the size of the noise in here, and maybe I will move the align tilt slightly to the bottom. We can bump, maybe add tilt taper with the radius set, and maybe I want to also add length. So I will add length and deformer, and now I may randomize the length using the input mask in here, randomize, and you see we have some randomization happening on the strands. So maybe I will bump up the radius slightly, bump up the strand count, and with that we get the result like this. So finally there is the convert panel. In past it was one with generate and convert, it was one panel. Now this is separate, so you can press finalize in here and it will create copy of strands converted to mesh with UVs and everything. You can export this to game and then remove and continue working on this, or you could add convert this to mesh. This would convert active object to mesh object. Hair system will be gone. You could export this and then use Ctrl-Shift-H and restore hair object, and the hair system is restored. It works the same as in the previous version of hair tool. So I think that the video is quite long, and I will finish this for now, and In the new videos, I will explain in more detail what's new in the hair system, how to use the baking scene, and maybe I will show you some presets, how they were made in the new library. Hope you like this update, and see ya.